Hi, this is Dr. Georgia. I hope you find today's message a blessing in your life. We want to make sure that we continue to provide these video messages for you when you can't come to church, or for those of you who live in a different state, or we noticed recently we have a lot of people in even different countries who are tuning in. So if that is you and you can donate to us, we invite you to hit that donate button just below the message here. So thanks so much. All right, let's prepare ourselves and put your hand over your eyes. I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
And you're over your ears. I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
And now over your heart. And extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
Okay, we're going to speed through this because we're tardy here, so you'll want your spiritual ears on. The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is that whatever we think, we can learn to unthink. That's the good news. Whatever we think, we can learn to unthink in our lives, but we have to be awake. You know, we can't think when we're asleep. We can't even think very well when we're drowsy. That's why we call this the Center for Spiritual Awareness, because we know that awareness is the first step in moving toward harmony with the spiritual principles that are governing all of our lives. And so we ask ourselves, because we know that with God all things are possible. So when we can get in touch with that spiritual principle and live by it and be awake to it all of the time, nothing is the limit. Nothing is the limit. We know that with love, all things are possible. With peace, all things are possible. With abundance, all things are possible. With trust, all things are possible. Those are simply God's street names. We know there's no God in the sky that's going to come down and do it for us. That we have to do through us, allow God to do through us, bring the energy and the power. And we only have to go to our own mind and our own heart. God is nowhere else, just in our own mind and our own heart, and is always there. So if there's somebody in the church this morning who thinks that you screwed up so many times that God has left your building, think again. God never leaves. Even if you screwed up on the way to church this morning, God is right where you are all of the time, never leaving you ever. See, the Muslims, they say it this way. They say God is closer than our very neck vein in our life. But if you're like me, you need help learning how to unthink those things that we have taught ourselves to think in this life. So I've been working with a book called The Big Leap by a man named Gay Hendricks. And his premise is this. We all have an upper limit to how happy and how successful we can allow ourselves to be. It's totally driven by us. It's not driven by an external. It's driven by us. We have a thermostatic setting, and when we reach that thermostatic setting of our pleasure, our success, our joy, then we don't want to go any farther, because going farther is going into the land of pure potentiality. And that's scary. So we push ourselves back to where we're comfortable. Let me tell you, being comfortable is not your friend. Let me say it again. Being comfortable is not your friend. Amen? Amen. And the reason is because once we stay there, we can't push past where we need our soul to grow, where our soul is calling us to grow in our life. When we exceed that upper limit, then we begin to sabotage ourselves. So we've talked about the whole purpose of this is to get into our zone of genius. Now, if you have just come in today, I encourage you to get on our website, go back, look at the first two talks about this, because they kind of lead you up to today. And remember, last week we talked about the 4 common hidden barriers to us pushing past our upper limit to get to our zone of genius. And one of the first one was we find ourselves fundamentally flawed. Some of us in the church find ourselves, we just feel like there's something wrong with us all the time. That's the hidden barrier of feeling fundamentally flawed. The second one is disloyalty. And we feel like we're abandoning our tribe. You know how that is? Where your friends are operating at this level and you love these people, you don't want to leave them, and you're afraid if you get too big for your britches, they're going to abandon you. They're not going to want you around anymore. So we allow ourselves only to go as high as they are. You want to find out if you're doing this, find out if your 5 closest friends are making more money than you are in your life. And chances are they're not. Chances are you're right around where your 5 closest friends. Find out how they are in their marriages and their relationships. Chances are you're right about where they are. Then you know that you might be, not necessarily, but you might be suffering from disloyalty and abandonment. The next one is being a burden because of some success in your life. And there's, I grew up Catholic. My parents practiced the rhythm method, and then, I came along significantly after my brother and sister, and so I always carried this thing about their one evening of success. I was kind of a burden because of their one evening of success. And as a result, after looking at this, I've begun to realize, I have this imposition thing where it's hard for me to ask for help because I feel like I'm imposing on other people. Now, it doesn't always come up in my life, but sometimes I have to look at, why aren't I asking for help? Is it because I have this hidden barrier that's in my subconscious driving me? And the last one is outshining. The last one is outshining, where we have the crime of we don't want to outshine our sister or brother, and so we've learned to tone ourselves down. We've learned to bring ourselves back in. So that kind of brings us up to the fundamentals of how this upper limit problem works. Now we're going to look today at some things that will help us to find ways to have liberation over this, ways to dissolve our upper limit problem. He says the first thing you can do to dissolve your upper limit is to teach yourself to have greater success over worrying. It's the number one way that we have an upper limit, that we allow ourselves to be victimized by our upper limit. Now, here's the thing. You want to practice this every day. Don't just come here and learn about it. Practice it. Know it. Not know about it, but know it. To do that, it's good to look at your week. Every day this week, look and see, how much worrying am I doing? He says this. He said, there's only one worry that has a positive aspect to your life, that supports your life. One worry. And it makes up less than 1% of all the worrying that you do. This one worry. And that's the worry about something you can do something about. 99% of the worries we have, we can't do anything about it. But we still spend our time doing that. But if you can do something, you want to. Many of us are procrastinators, and so we put off paying our bills. We put off going to the doctor. We put off doing this. I used to put off going to the dentist, and now I have an issue with the dentist. We don't want to put stuff off. Maybe for you it's even opening mail. And pretty soon you don't open your mail until now you have a big worry about it. You can do something about that, and you should do something about it. But 99% of the worrying you do, you can't do anything about anyway, and it's holding you hostage, and it will move you farther back from that zone of genius that we're trying to get to. Remember, the whole point of this is for you to live in your zone of genius everywhere, all the time, every day, in every area. So we're not a settling tribe here at CSA. We're not settling for being genius in our finances and having crummy relationships. We're not settling for being genius in our relationships and having poor health. No, we're not settling. We're going to use the spiritual principles to have success in every area of our life all of the time. That's our goal. We're not settling for. So one of the things that we need to do is to continue to have victory over this this thing about worry, because worry will lower your thermostat all of the time and set you farther and farther back. Many of you are familiar with the work of a woman named Naomi Remin. Naomi Remin is a Harvard physician who works mostly with people with catastrophic illness in her life, and she's written wonderful books about stories primarily about the people that she's worked with. If you ever have a chance to get a Naomi Remin book, buy it. It will serve your soul. It will feed you. You know, some of us like to go to nature and we're fed immediately. We get out of the car and we're fed. Naomi Remin does that also for me, if I just read one of her books. And she tells a story about growing up herself, working class in New York City. And she lived in an apartment crammed full of her relatives in this apartment in New York City. And her father always had a dream of owning a house. And he won the lottery in New York. He won $150,000 on the lottery in New York. He went out to Long Island, they bought a little house. And he was thrilled with the house. But here's what happened. He was so worried about losing the house, he became a prisoner to the house. He never, you know, when he had the apartment, they'd go to Coney Island, they'd go on picnics, they'd go to the movies, they'd do family things together. But once he had the house, he would never leave the house because he was afraid it would burn down. He was afraid that the neighbor, whose 16-year-old daughter was getting her license, was going to run the car right through the house. He just had every worry imaginable about this, so he never left. Well, after she became more successful as a physician, she went back and visited, and she noticed that they had, of course, brought all of the old furniture from the apartment, never bought any new furniture for the house. And they had this couch where the stuffing was coming out. She said, you know, I'm going to go in a catalog and I'm going to mail him a couch. And so she went into a catalog and she had a couch sent over to the house, which was 2 years old by this time, but she sent it out. And so about a couple weeks later, she called him and she said, Dad, how do you like the couch? He said, oh, they called to deliver it and I canceled the delivery. She said, why? Well, I didn't want anybody to know how they could get in the house. Who knows what they'd be like? Who knows what they'd steal once they got in the house? Now that's an extreme example of what worry can do. It makes us a prisoner to that which we're afraid we're going to lose. So I ask you this week to look at, are you afraid you're going to lose something? Because if you are, you're probably leaning toward this idea of over-worrying in your life. So here's what happens. Sometimes fear grips us, and then we become so engaged with the fear that we grip onto that fear, and we won't let it go. And if you don't let the fear go, you can't dissolve your upper limit problem. You can't go to your zone of genius. You are indeed a prisoner of that. Well, the good news is you can transform your worry with two simple questions. See, that's the beauty of spiritual principles and spiritual teachings. They're not complicated. The only thing complicated about spiritual principles and spiritual teachings is what we make them. But they're not complicated. The two questions are so simple. The first one is it real? Is my fear real? And the second question is, what can I do about it right now? Is there anything I can do about that fear right now? If we can train ourselves, and that's what spiritual practice is, it's a training ground. If we can train ourselves to answer these two questions, we can begin to dissolve the amount of worry that we have in our life. Corinthians 15, it says this, we can raise ourselves higher in the twinkling of an eye. Paul is telling us here, it's not that difficult. These simple questions can gain victory. That's the first one, is worry. The second one is gaining victory over blame and criticism. Blame and criticism of other people and of ourselves. In order to soar, in order for our soul to soar, which is why you're here, no matter why you think you're here, that's why you're here. Because your soul is asking you to soar. In order to be able to soar, we have to create energy flow around us that is positive. That is positive. And you can't do that if you are addicted to blame and criticism, even blame and criticism of yourself. It's a sure way to stop the flow of positive energy. Now I'm telling you, those of you in the room, and I know there are many of us in the room that are part of the resistance movement, what we're now calling the resistance movement, pushing back against going back to old ways that no longer serve our country or our people. Those of us who are part of that resistance movement, we have to be especially careful of this idea of blame and criticism. Because I can tell you, I am on it all the time. Blaming and criticizing. You know, before I read this, I just ordered a new T-shirt, and it's full of blame and criticism. Blame and criticism. You know? And now I order this, and I think, God, I can't wander around in this T-shirt. I want to get into my zone of genius. Now I'm worried about that. Now I got that to be worried about. What can I do about that? Until it gets here, there's nothing I can do about it. But so we want to be really aware of how this thing is, because the thing about blame and criticism, it doesn't solve anything. It doesn't produce one positive result. It does not produce one positive result. It only produces more frustration for yourself. So to begin to think about taking an inventory every day again, this is awareness. It's being awake. It's teaching ourselves to unthink. Being aware that we can let this go. We can dissolve it. The next one to dissolve is deflection. How many of us do that deflection? Somebody gives us a compliment, and we're immediately deflecting it, putting it down, putting it away, pushing down. People are trying to give us positive energy. They're trying to up-level our flow, and we deflect it. He has, in this book, he has a quick one. He says, Joe, you did a great job on that presentation. Jack, nah, I ran out of time and had to leave out some of the best stuff. Joe, still, I noticed that people were really paying attention. Jack, I'm glad they weren't paying too close attention, because they would have seen a lot more places where I messed up. See, we do that. You and I do that. We deflect, 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 deflect in our lives. Some of us have a handle on those kind of things, but what happens is we invite illness or accident. When we get to that upper limit where our thermostatic setting is, where we're happy and beyond, we get sick or we have an accident. Now, I don't mean to suggest that every illness or every accident is a result of you going past your thermostatic setting into your zone of genius. But I do invite you to look at it, to ask yourself. I went through a period, fortunately I'm out of it now, but I went through a period of about 10 years where every time I went on a vacation, I got a cold. Every single time. Because my ceiling of pleasure was reached, and I had to bring myself back down. So I invite you to take a look at that idea of accident. The last one I want to talk about real quickly is gaining victory over integrity breaches. Gaining victory over integrity breaches. Hendricks says that committing an integrity breach is the best way to bring down your thermostatic setting. It's the very most effective way. The most common types of integrity breaches are lies, broken agreements, and withheld truths. Lies, broken agreements, and withheld truths. See, if we just make a commitment this week to look at those three, we can improve our thermostatic setting in quite an amazing way. See, integrity breaches don't have anything to do about religion. They don't have anything to do about morality. They have everything to do with your spirit. Because here's what happens. When you don't need anybody, you don't need a minister, you don't need a therapist, you don't need anybody, a parent, you don't need a friend, a spouse, you don't need anybody to tell you when you've had an integrity breach. You know it. Your body tells you. It feels different. You feel like, oh no, there's something inside. It's saying no. And see, what happens is every time we have an integrity breach, we separate ourselves from our own divinity. Your divinity is never separate. but we separate ourselves in consciousness from our own divinity whenever we have an integrity breach. And we know it. We know it. So our work is to begin to work with these ideas and to, so we say, oh, I feel like I just did something wrong. You ask yourself, did I just go up to my thermostatic setting and need to cause myself to have a breach so that I could bring myself down? Well, I've run through these pretty quickly, but I wanted to just give you a little taste that there is a solution. Next week when you come back, here's what we're going to talk about. What is my genius? Let's find out what our genius is. Let's find ways to, not only now we know there's some ways to look at where we're not getting it and ways to get to it, but now, what is the it? Are we clear about what our genius is? And the second question we'll answer next week is, how can I bring forth my genius in ways that serve others and myself at the same time? Because we are all in this together. And there's no point in me getting into my genius and not helping you along. And that's the same thing. That's why we're in this fabulous, vibrant, spiritual community. So let's take this message into prayer, knowing that there's only one power. It's the power of love. I don't need to do anything more but let it come through me. Get out of the way. Let it throw out there that which it needs to throw out. For that is the solution, love. I give thanks for that. I release this word into the long together this thing.